going back to Powell's pressers, and what he talks about is he says every single time he gets up there, he reiterates and makes a point that, look, we cannot let inflation get out of control. We have to contain it. And we're telling you we're going to drive this economy into contraction, a recession, right? And so when they do that, they know, and he has said that they have tools to deal with that problem, right? But they don't have tools to deal with hyperinflation. So they're boxed into a corner, and what they'll do is they will drive this economy into a recession, and then they'll come back out with QE. And that's the QE infinity that everybody talks about.
James Lavish, a former hedge fund manager and Bitcoin enthusiast, has been sounding the alarm, along with many other macro experts, about the economic traps that the United States has created for itself over the past 2 decades. According to Lavish, a current managing partner at the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, the Federal Reserve has messed up the U.S. economy by constantly printing money since 2008. Keeping rates artificially low for years, and then jerking up at the fastest pace in history last year. According to Lavish, the United States economy is stuck in an unsustainable debt cycle, and the only solution is to continue printing money indefinitely. However, policymakers appreciate the urgency of the crisis and see this as unsustainable as someone taking out a new credit card loan to pay off an old one. An intriguing analysis of a recent report from the Congressional Budget Office (CBO) was offered by Lavish in one of his tweets from March. The 10-year federal budget analysis forecasts were included in the CBO's report. Some of Lavish's tweets in the discussion are as follows. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the United States Treasury will receive $4.89 trillion in revenue in 2023. By 2033, this is expected to rise to $7 billion USD, a gain of nearly $2 trillion. That's a rise of almost 47%. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, though. This is only part of the story, and the CBO makes the implicit assumption that there will never be another economic downturn. It seems like costs are more than expected. Estimated required spending in 2023 is $3.8 trillion. Quite a deal more than the $3.6 trillion the CBO predicted only in May. Total interest earned in 2023 is estimated at $640 billion, up from $442 billion in 2017. The Congressional Budget Office forecasts that spending would increase by 60% over the next decade, reaching $10 trillion in 2033. That's much over the median forecast for sales growth, which was 47%. The CBO forecasts that we will incur increasing yearly losses for the next decade. The debt spiral, which I have discussed at length, has a name in the report and in Lavish's analysis. CBO predicts a 47% rise in revenue and a 60% increase in spending, and those numbers are before recessions are factored in. They print extra dollars to make up the gap, but how exactly does that work? Going back to the printers is neither practical nor tenable. The repercussions of the exceptional rate rises, the debt spiral, and the imminent reintroduction of quantitative easing were recently discussed by Lavish during an appearance on the Barron network. A former manager of a hedge firm claims that the printers would soon be turned back on, but not like before.
Issue here is that the Fed raised rates at a rocket pace, right? They raised rates from ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, which we'd had for a long time since the financial crisis, the great financial crisis, until now, and they raised them so rapidly on a percentage basis. They were down at 0.25%, and now they're up over 5%. And so we're not able to see the effects of that tightening yet on the economy. We're just now seeing things that are happening in the credit sphere that indicate that that tightening is going to have a major impact to the economy. And that's what we're seeing in the regional banks, and for a number of reasons. That math is the math. It's not going to change, and that's why I wrote about this. We are in a debt spiral, Paul. There's no way out. We've gotten to the point where our deficit is expanding every single year, faster than our GDP, right? So, and the problem is we can't make that up. It's like if you're a single parent. This is what I tell people: if you're a single parent and you've got a credit card debt, and you're just trying to pay it off, but you can't really get there. You've got 2 jobs, you've got kids, you've got to pay for your mandatory expenses. which is your house, your mortgage or rent, your car payment, so you can get
Right.
back and forth to work, gas, food. You can't change those. And so you take out another credit card to pay off the last one, or to
Mhm.
just have access to capital. And we keep doing that. And so, as you know, and I've seen you talk about this with other guests, is that right now, and even since I posted that, we've seen the first half numbers from
Right.
2023, and we're at such a large deficit that we're having to borrow more every single month in order to
Mhm.
make up that deficit. So the answer is there is no way out except one way, which is massive money printing, massive inflation. That's the
Hyperinflation.
only way
Yep.
out. The issue is that it's just growing so rapidly, right? So what are the three things you can do as a government? And we're right up against the debt ceiling again, right?
Right.
So we're going through this whole process again, and it's a big show. It's all theater, but you can have austerity, right? Which we've seen in Greece and Spain and Italy and back in the great financial crisis. That's one thing. You can cut expenses. Well,
Yeah.
that's political suicide, right? To cut
Not gonna happen.
entitlements, to cut Social Security,
Yeah.
to cut Medicaid. That's not going to happen. So that's one thing. The second thing you could do is raise taxes. But when you raise taxes, then you disincentivize productivity, right? And so you disincentivize, and you actually take money away from companies that they would otherwise use for reinvestment into their products, their services, right? To expand their footprint. And so in essence, in the end, it winds up having the same effect, where if you raise taxes, you shrink GDP ultimately. So that's the second
Yeah.
thing you can do. The third thing you could do is you could print more bonds, right?
Yeah.
Which is what we do to close that gap. But then when you do that, which is what you're getting at, is how long can you kick that can down the road?
Right.
Well, you need higher inflation in order to have a negative real rate of return. So what I mean by that is that you need GDP to grow at a faster rate nominally, right, than the interest on your debt. Okay, so that means you need GDP or inflation to be higher than the interest on the debt, which means that you have a negative real rate of return, right? So that's what they're looking to do. Now, the question is, how bad does inflation get? We keep hearing Powell talk about it on every single press conference, every single presser he has. He says we need to get inflation back to 2%. Well, that's an optic for the Fed, right? They want us to believe that inflation is down around 2%.
Mhm.
It hasn't been. We can see it in our goods and services that we buy every day. That you go out to the grocery store, it is absolutely 20% higher than it was last year. Yet they're saying that inflation was 5% or 4.9%. It's not real. They move those numbers around. But what they need to do is have that inflation higher. So how do they do that? Well, with that debt so great and that debt service so great, that number, they're eventually going to have to step in and print money. And going back to Powell's pressers, and what he talks about is, he says every single time he gets up there, he reiterates and makes a point that, look, we cannot let inflation get out of control. We have to contain it. And we're telling you we're going to drive this economy into contraction, a recession, right? And so when they do that, they know, and he has said that they have tools to deal with that problem, right? But they don't have tools to deal with hyperinflation. So they're boxed into a corner, and what they'll do is they will drive this economy into a recession, and then they'll come back out with QE. And that's the QE infinity that everybody talks about, right? And so to answer your original question, when does this happen? I believe this happens in the next 2 years. Within this cycle, we start to see a major breakdown in the economy, where the Fed has to step in and do multiples of QE than they did even last time, which was massive. And so that's where the inflation comes roaring back in. And I don't know if it's 10%, 15%, 20%, but it is not going to be 4% inflation for the foreseeable future. It's going to be much higher. it's all interconnected, right? So what we're seeing BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they're trying to pull away from that dollar hegemony, right? So they have said they need to pull away from the stranglehold that the US Treasury basically has on the world. If you want to deal in energy since 1971, you've literally had to do it with US dollars, which means that you need US Treasuries in your own treasury as reserves in order to use those to have access to dollars to buy your energy. But they want to move away from that for a lot of reasons. One of them is that we demonstrated to the world that if you're on the fringe, if you're not one of our allies, we could just turn off your treasuries and you won't have access to them. We did that to Russia. That was a mistake in my mind, in my opinion. However, so what happens is, as they're trying to pull away, the thing is, Paul, the BRICS nations, as much as they want to have their own reserve currency, there's nothing there that can yet rival the treasury. If you look at the US dollar, and it has been going down in usage over the last 10, 12 years, it's gone from 69 or 70% down to 59%, but there's nothing even close to the US dollar. And that's really the most important thing here. The US dollar, I don't believe will lose the global reserve currency status. But I do believe, getting to your point, that we will see the rise of additional global reserve currency or global reserve assets, and particularly the one that I see that wins out is Bitcoin. Ultimately, between now and then, I believe that the BRICS nations will lean on gold as a reserve asset that they can somehow have audits to, that they can somehow deliver to each other in these massive transactions of energy. And that's really what they're getting at. And does that hurt the US Treasury? Absolutely. It crowds out that marginal buyer, those balance sheets, right? So we're already seeing these major nations pull back of their buying of the treasuries, right? So if you crowd out other balance sheets and you have to issue so many treasuries to deal with this massive deficit, well, who's going to buy those? The US Fed is going to have to buy them. The Treasury is going to print money at the Fed. The Fed will have the major banks buy them, and then they'll buy it from them, and they'll monetize the debt just like they did back in 2020. It is the same game plan, except it's going to be much larger. That's where the inflation really comes in, and that's where the problem with the Treasury comes in.
We hope this video has served as a wake-up call and provided you with valuable insights to safeguard your financial well-being. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay informed about our latest videos. At Market Empire, we're dedicated to equipping you with the knowledge and tools you need for financial success. Thank you for joining us today.